The 1st of September, 1939. Westerplatte Peninsula, Free City of Danzig. In the morning, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opens fire on the small Polish military post on the Baltic coast. Explosions shake the peninsula, smoke rises above the harbor, and within minutes, the German attack starts across the Polish border. German aircraft bomb towns and railway lines, armored units advance inland, and special security detachments follow the army with prepared arrest lists in their hands. Teachers, priests, officers, lawyers, and community leaders are marked for elimination. The invasion marks the beginning of the Second World War, and in the weeks that follow, thousands of those whose names were written on these lists are arrested, shot in forests, or sent to prisons that quickly overflow. To handle the growing number of detainees, in May 1940, the Germans establish a new concentration camp near the town of Auschwitz, about 60 kilometers west of Kraków. The newly established camp is called Auschwitz. What begins as a camp for Polish prisoners soon becomes a vast center of terror and mass murder. Among the officials who will control interrogations, investigations, and executions inside this camp is the head of its political department. His name is Maximilian Grabner. Maximilian Grabner was born on the 2nd of October 1905 in Vienna, then part of Austria-Hungary. He came from modest circumstances and received only a basic education. In the 1920s, he worked as a lumberjack, performing hard physical labor in a country still struggling with the consequences of the First World War and the collapse of the Habsburg Empire. Austria during these post-war years was politically divided and economically unstable. Street violence between right-wing and left-wing groups was common, and many people hoped for order and authority. Seeking stability and advancement, Grabner entered the Austrian police in 1930, and after a short period of training, he worked as an ordinary police officer and later as a criminal investigator at the police headquarters in Vienna. Despite having a stable job, he was radicalized, and on the 1st of August 1932 he joined the Nazi Party, which was soon banned in Austria. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and one of his main goals was to incorporate Austria into Germany. From the moment he took power, pressure on Austria increased. Austrian Nazis, encouraged and supported from Berlin, worked to destabilize the Austrian state. On the 12th of March 1938, the Anschluss took place, and Austria was annexed into the German Reich. For Austrian Nazis, this was a moment of triumph. After years of struggle, political opponents were arrested, Jewish citizens were humiliated in public, and the structures of the Nazi regime were rapidly introduced to Austrian society. In September 1938, Grabner joined the Gestapo, the secret police of Nazi Germany, and also joined the SS, the Nazi paramilitary organization that became one of the main instruments of repression, racial policy, and mass murder in Nazi Germany. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. From November 1939, Grabner served as a criminal secretary at the Gestapo in the city of Katowice, where he was responsible for identifying, interrogating, and eliminating real or suspected enemies of the Nazi regime. At the end of May 1940, Grabner became head of the political department at the newly established Auschwitz concentration camp. It maintained prisoner records, conducted interrogations, investigated escape attempts, and fought resistance inside the camp. While he had to cooperate with the camp commandant, at that time Rudolf Höss, he was officially subordinate to Gestapo authorities outside the camp. This dual structure increased his power and autonomy, because he did not have any direct superiors in the camp. Inside Auschwitz, Grabner was feared as an arrogant, unpredictable, and brutal man. Prisoners called him the Herrgott von Auschwitz, the god of Auschwitz, because he decided their fate during interrogations and executions. His department ordered intensified interrogations, which in practice meant systematic torture. Prisoners were beaten with whips and batons, hung upside down, soaked with water, deprived of sleep, and confined in the bunker of Block 11, the internal prison of the camp. Block 11 became synonymous with suffering and death. An early example of collective punishment under Grabner's authority followed the escape of Tadeusz Wyjowski on the 11th of July, 1940. Once the escape was discovered, the entire camp population, then numbering about 1,300 prisoners, was forced to stand for 20 hours without rest or food. Felix Miwik, then prisoner at Auschwitz, remembered how Grabner asked people who had information to come forward, promising that nothing untoward would happen to them. Miwik said, "Initially, quite obviously, the prisoners did not believe him. However, when they learned that he was an Austrian, they started thinking that maybe they could trust him. In order to help their fellow inmates, some individuals came forward, even though they knew nothing about the escape. Grabner promised that no harm would befall the prisoners who testified. However, he lied." Miwik continued saying, "2 SS men would hold the prisoner down on the buck. Grabner stood to the side and asked questions, while 2 other SS men hit the inmate with a whip, and a prisoner named Michalik wrote down his testimony. The inmates who testified, and there was a dozen or so of them, all died during the night. In fact, they knew nothing about Wyjowski's escape, but they wanted to help their friends who were standing in the cold without any food. We were not allowed to go to the toilet, while Grabner instructed the SS men to keep guard, threatening prisoners with decimation and ordering them to perform knee bends and squats with their hands on their necks. Grabner also took part in so-called bunker clearings. Prisoners from the cells of Block 11 were led into the courtyard between Blocks 10 and 11 and shot at the so-called Black Wall. Thousands were executed there. On one occasion, a woman was to be shot at the death wall. However, she was not wounded by the gunfire because she fell after losing consciousness due to the shock and fear. Believed to be dead, she was placed among corpses awaiting cremation. When she regained consciousness and began to beg for her life, Grabner was informed. He came personally and shot her with his revolver. Such acts were not exceptional, but part of routine terror. From 1942, Auschwitz became the central site of the mass murder of European Jews. Selections of deportees took place at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Those deemed unfit for labor were sent directly to the gas chambers. According to survivor Philipp Möller and Perry Brott, a member of the political department, Grabner gave speeches to Jews destined for gassing at the old crematorium in the main camp to calm them down. He told the people to undress for bathing so that they could then eat and start work in the camp. These speeches were designed to prevent panic and resistance, but behind the calm words stood immediate murder with Zyklon B gas. Grabner was also involved in falsifying documents. After executions, deaths were recorded as caused by natural illnesses such as typhus. This bureaucratic camouflage was characteristic of the Nazi system, which combined open brutality with administrative camouflage of its crimes. Grabner assisted in ensuring the machinery of death functioned efficiently and left a misleading paper trail. In September 1942, he was awarded the second class of the War Merit Cross with Swords, an honor that reflected recognition by the Nazi regime. Yet on the 30th of November 1943, his position changed abruptly. He was removed from office in the camp and arrested by the SS itself. The investigation was led by SS Judge Georg Konrad Morgen, who examined corruption and unauthorized killings within concentration camps. Grabner was accused of the arbitrary shooting of around 2,000 prisoners without proper authorization from his superiors, and of enriching himself by stealing property taken from murdered Jews. Even within the SS, theft from state property was considered a serious crime, not because of concern for victims, but because it violated internal discipline and the loot was stolen from the Nazi state. In October 1944, proceedings began before an SS and police court in Weimar. The prosecutor demanded a long sentence for aggravated theft and murder. However, Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, refused to cooperate in clarifying the case. As Germany's military situation collapsed, the trial was adjourned and never concluded. Grabner was returned to Gestapo service in Katowice and later transferred to Breslau, today's Polish Wrocław. When Nazi Germany collapsed in May 1945, the structures that had protected him disappeared. Even though Grabner attempted to hide near Vienna in Austria, working as a farmhand under a false identity, on the 4th of August 1945 he was arrested while working in the fields and placed in custody in Vienna. After Grabner's arrest, Auschwitz survivor Hermann Langbein perceived him as a whining man and a coward. In 1946, Grabner testified in prison. "I only participated in the murder of 3 million people out of consideration for my family. I was never anti-Semitic." In January 1947, material suggesting escape preparations were found in his cell, indicating that he still sought to avoid responsibility for his crimes. On the 12th of July 1947, he was extradited to Poland. He was tried before the Supreme National Tribunal in Kraków during the Auschwitz Trial, which began on the 24th of November 1947. Survivors testified in detail about torture, shootings, and executions carried out under his authority. Witnesses described how prisoners summoned to the political department often preferred suicide to interrogation, fearing what awaited them. On the 22nd of December 1947, the tribunal found Maximilian Grabner guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced him to death. 1 month later, on the 24th of January 1948, when guards in Montelupich prison in Kraków came to collect him for the execution, Grabner, who had once enjoyed killing people for sport, cowardly kneeled before the officers crying, attempting to kiss their boots and begging for mercy. It changed nothing. When he was led to the gallows and hanged for his crimes, he was 42 years old.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.